So the key thing we're here to talk about are classes and tutoring. So let's kind of talk about classes versus tutoring in terms of there can be some variety in classes. So when we're talking about the two, what do we think? Are classes, inferior to tutoring, or is tutoring inferior to classes? What are your thoughts on that, Dominique?
Well, I think, if cost is not an option in general, one-on-one tutoring is more efficient and then ultimately probably more effective. But I do think in certain, so we could talk about that why, but I think the sort of pros of small group classes, in addition to the fact that they're usually more economical for families, is, sometimes students actually get a little scared when they are one-on-one with a tutor. It's a lot to bring to the table, right? You've got to be on if you are going for one-on-one tutoring. You've got to have that homework done. It's just you. Whereas if you're in
it's concentrated, right? Like the idea is it's concentrated and it's targeted.
It is. And, I've been told I have sort of an intense personality, for better or for worse. And, some students and even some adults can find that intimidating. So, I think if you want to sort of, especially I think if you have the time, right? So say if you just finished your sophomore year, right? And you're thinking about prepping for the SAT over the summer, a small group class is totally fine. I think I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for everybody if, say, you just finished your junior year and you've really only got a couple more months to go.
So you bring up an interesting point about that dynamic, the difference between one student working with a teacher the whole time versus someone in a class. And when we say small group, I'm not sure where you guys level out. My classes cap at 12. Some people cap at 8. Some people cap at 10. Some people go to full-blown lectures, and you may have a lot of students. But if we're talking about a group, then some students feel more comfortable in a group because the full brilliance of the tutor is not directed at them at all times. But then isn't the downside of group instruction in that regard that some students want to get lost in the crowd, they want to hide in the group, and they ultimately do not learn because they hang back, they're very passive about learning?
I mean, I think that is the downside, right? So for instance, I'm actually running, it just happens to be a really small SAT prep class. Mine usually cap at 10, but it just so happened that everybody involved was the daughter or son of someone I grew up with. So I ran it at 3.
Yeah.
And, at 3, you'd think that you need to sort of bring your game for a class like that's that small. But there was one student who asked a question, and then this is not in person, it's on Zoom. And then the other 2 students, I think, got that question correct. And so they turned their camera off, right? And, it's fine. They want to get up, go get a drink, whatever. But obviously during those few minutes when I was explaining this one problem to the student who didn't get it, the other 2 were sort of waiting there. Right. So that's what I mean about one-on-one being more efficient. Obviously, that's never going to happen if it's just you and the tutor.
Well, I think part of it too is curriculum, right? That we probably all can acknowledge that there are going to be things that we want to teach regardless of scoring level, right? Strategies or techniques or share information. And I think one of the benefits of a class is that that's all deliberate. It's intentional what you're going to go over, what you're going to review. The difference, I think, what you're describing there, Dominique, is that when you start looking at individual questions, then you start seeing that variety of how some students, we all know some sections like easier versus harder questions. Then the group can be tilted depending upon who's asking the questions, and what levels and things like that. Then it kind of takes a little different form.
Right.
It's interesting that you bring up curriculum, Amy, because very often when we talk about running classes, That depends a lot on a curriculum and having a specific curriculum for the class. And Dominique, I don't know if you have one at Crimson Coaching. We do at Chariot Learning. And I find that because we have a curriculum that we devote the first 12 hours of instruction to reviewing that curriculum, that automatically excludes certain students from our target demographic, in that these are we want in the class the students that need everything we're going to cover in the curriculum at the pace we're going to cover it, which means students that are too low, they need too much remediation, would not find the class the best use of,
because there's a presumption
time.
there that they know certain things.
Yeah.
And if they don't, there's
and
problems.
also if they know too much.
Yes.
I mean, look, we've had kids come out of our class with, perfect scores, literally, but those students didn't get a ton out of every minute of the class, right? They got enough, but there was a lot of time where they really didn't need to be paying attention because we were going over fundamentals of math and grammar and reading. So I think about efficiency, and I think about that fact that a small group class can be very efficient if you're starting prep in the big part of the bell curve.
Yes.
If you are scoring, 40th to 70th percentile, you are in the sweet spot for needing everything that would be covered in the group class. Dominique, how does that fit your experience?
Absolutely. There was a student who was in my winter class, and he wound up getting a 15-20 after the class on the SAT. I mean, he was already scoring pretty high. And I do think for I think the evidence-based reading writing, I don't think he came out from my class with a whole lot, because he was already scoring so high in that. He really just needed it for the math, but he was very happy, And then on the other end of the spectrum, even though I do tell parents, students really need to have taken Algebra 1 and 2. Someone signed up this summer, only having taken Algebra 1, tried for a few weeks to stay in the class, and then he just told his dad, look, I don't know any of this math. And because essentially it's a review of Algebra 2, right? I'm not teaching Algebra 2 like a math teacher over the course of 10th grade would teach it. It was just going too fast for him. So yeah, I do think you're right, that sweet spot of the bell curve is probably going to get the most out of any kind of group class.
But the key thing I think with group classes can also be like Mike, I think you said earlier, is actively engaged. So if someone's going to sign up for a class and feel like they can be passive and be sort of the bystander, the result sometimes is that osmosis is not necessarily going to serve them. However, we do have students and families who say, we like the idea of a group class because my student will benefit from hearing the questions of other students, like that dynamic or that engagement or that discussion. Some other student may ask a question that their student might not, in which case they benefit. So it's a very interesting, student personality, and how's that going to present in a group class can sometimes be a factor.
For sure, especially when you have the gregarious person. When we're talking about personality, some kids like the cohort of students prepping along with them. Especially, I love the experience of getting students from 5 or 7 different schools together in the same room, and they start talking to each other and oh, this kid, I know that kid. And then even moving forward, when I've run practice tests for both students from classes and one-to-one instruction, I see the class students sit together and they have created a little team for themselves.
Absolutely. And I think another thing is the tutor's role in this, or the teacher, if it's a small group class, can be essential. So for instance, I just had a new student kind of enter about a third of the way through the class, and they're also doing private coaching with me. So the mom said, and the mom and I went to Harvard together. So the mom said she'll be okay as long as she has the one-on-one. I noticed the very first class, her daughter was very quiet. So didn't really say anything. So I reached out to her by text after class, and I just said, hey, Raquel, I just want to make sure that you felt comfortable during class. How did class feel for you? And it turned out she did feel comfortable, but I think just sort of that, just the teacher's role in making the students who aren't perhaps the gregarious ones, the extroverted ones, I think that could also go a long way.
Such a great point. We hope you enjoyed this video as much as we did. You'll find plenty more like it when you explore the Test and the Rest channel. Be sure to comment, share, and subscribe for a constant stream of insights into learning, education, testing, and admissions. For full podcasts and amazing resources, find us at testsandtherest.com.